Good morning, everyone. When I was about 6 years old, I was challenged to a duel by the BBC's Mr. Maker. His usual art projects rarely caught my attention for very long, but as the credits began to roll that day, every atom in my body was buzzing with a newfound sense of purpose. The year was 2009, and I was ready to create the coolest rainbow-colored candle that the world had ever seen. Armed with a lighter, a box of crayons, and a heart-shaped baking tray, I was ready to fulfill my destiny. I faithfully mirrored all the steps that I'd just seen on TV, and I even brought my favorite stuffy toy to come and bear witness to my miracle. And when the tip of the first crayon began to swell and succumb to the heat, I was absolutely mesmerized. However, what I did not do was to take off the crayon's flammable paper wrapper. Sure enough, the paper began to burn, and so I quickly dropped it, straight onto the craft table, which subsequently burst into flames. Being the responsible, upright citizen that I was, I knew exactly what I had to do. I yelled for my dad to come and put out the fire. I didn't really know this at the time, but that was basically what was happening in a place over 9,000 miles away, called Wall Street. The global financial crisis of 2009 was one of the biggest financial flameouts that the world had ever seen. To put it simply, the crisis saw the implosion of a system entrenched with false advertising and a grave lack of oversight, wiping trillions of dollars off share markets from New York to Shanghai, and causing severe ramifications that lasted for years after Ben Bernanke, the US Reserve Bank governor, put the fires out. Eventually, jobs began to trickle back into our respective countries, and our economies began inching towards recovery. However, almost a decade later, a festering wound is beginning to surface. For the generation that grew up in the midst of the financial crisis, the faith that we had once put in our financial institutions has been corroded. The way that we conceptualize things affects our ability to apply them. Consider the number 1. Both of these symbols represent the exact same thing, a singular entity. But while one system enables little more than just basic addition and subtraction, the other system can be manipulated in a myriad of ways in order to advance scientific and technological progress. So, on that note, I would like to ask a simple question. What is money? Open your average economics textbook, and you will see that money is a medium of exchange that enables efficient trade by eliminating the need for a double coincidence of wants. Or in English, that it's a thing that you can definitely swap for other things. But I believe that money serves a wider purpose. Just look at a $10 banknote. It's just a piece of paper. It doesn't have any intrinsic value, yet it can still somehow fund a last-minute grocery run. And the figure of $10 doesn't really mean anything either. Consider the $100 trillion banknotes circulating in Zimbabwe, or the hyperinflation in Venezuela or Turkey. So why does your money have any value at all? I would say that money is only worth whatever somebody is willing to give you for it. And from there, a new concept starts to form, that at its core, money is essentially a vessel of trust. When you agree to work for money, you are trusting that it will retain its value, and therefore are trusting the institutions that control its value. This is especially true nowadays that most of our economy operates using virtual money. It's completely intangible, and you're trusting that the changing numbers on your computer screen will be recognized by banks and assigned some sort of value. The word trust is the very foundation of our financial systems. The word credit itself is derived from the Latin word credo, which means I believe. And up until the end of 2007, that trust was basically universal. But what if the next generation decides to put their trust in something else? When I first heard of cryptocurrencies, I didn't understand why they were such a big deal. I thought that it was just another way of paying for things digitally, and I wrote off all debate as a generational spat that would eventually fizzle out. But towards the end of 9th grade, I came to realize that my understanding of cryptocurrencies was horribly wrong. It all started when my economics teacher introduced cryptocurrencies to my class as something that could form the basis of a so-called economy of the future. It was intriguing, but I was thoroughly confused. What was so groundbreaking about virtual money? Hasn't online shopping been a thing for ages? Clearly, there was a special something that I hadn't quite grasped yet. But when I started digging for answers, I found that it was surprisingly difficult to find. Almost everything that I came across was an ad, a bitter smear campaign, or a flurry of tech jargon. Every time that I heard the phrase peer-to-peer network, a little part of me just died. And while I immediately found myself becoming fluent in financial buzzwords, it took me months to find concrete answers to the question that got me hooked in the first place. So what? A world in which cryptocurrencies are widely used would require us to adopt a radically different view of the way that our markets operate today, and would require new institutions to support that new way of thinking. However, we can't be asked to really contemplate something that we don't understand. And so, today I'm going to try and answer two basic questions. What on earth is a cryptocurrency, and why should I care? Trust, faith, belief, credo. Money is a vessel of trust, and I understand if the concept of cryptocurrencies sounds suspicious straight away. Even the name is shady and sinister. Crypto has links to cryptic, which means secret, mystical, to do with the occult. But when you use a cryptocurrency, you're basically transferring your trust from the current financial system to a complex technological framework. And this framework was constructed in a way that allows it to enable two key philosophies. The first being that no single authority should be able to decide the value of money, and the second being that everybody is entitled to privacy in their financial transactions. So, what would this look like? Cryptocurrencies are programmed to increase the supply of coins on a regular basis until it hits a predetermined limit. And throughout this process, the value of the coins are purely derived from the market forces of supply and demand. However, if cryptocurrencies were widely adopted, this could dilute the effect of policies imposed by central banks, making it difficult to stimulate or cool down economies using monetary policy. Growing up, my friends and I were obsessed with trading sports cards. Every day after school, we would rush to our local convenience store and harass our parents to buy these little foil packages of cards to add to our collections. And every recess, we would all pull out our portfolios and cutthroat deals over cartons of chocolate milk. We remained proud patrons of that daylight robbery scheme for about a year. But one day, something changed. The value of our cards was dictated by a color-coded system, with blue cards being worth the least and gold cards being worth the most. I had traded away one of my best cards for a full upper-range team that I thought could get me any card I wanted. But unfortunately, my class didn't have enough purchasing power to keep the shelves stocked. In the span of roughly a week, the size of everybody's portfolio pretty much doubled after there was this huge clearance sale. And everybody had heaps of mediocre cards. Suddenly, nobody wanted my team anymore. And even though I had technically been repaid for my golden card, it was worth essentially nothing. When it comes to public debt, governments can pull this move as a last resort. If they're backed into a corner and can't repay their debts, it's possible for them to flood the market with cheap money and then use these to satisfy their debts so they're technically repaid, even though the value is largely diminished by inflation. This strategy gained notoriety as a scapegoat for the hyperinflation crisis in post-war Germany. But despite being widely frowned upon, it's still used as a crutch for major modern economies such as Japan. Technically, if we ever get to a point that cryptocurrencies dominate the global economy, the regular currencies that we have now would diminish in value, and that would then affect the value of goods priced in fiat currencies, such as government bonds. Technically, there's nothing stopping a government from issuing these bonds in cryptocurrency. But because they don't have any control over the supply of the cryptocurrency, if they're backed into a corner, they will have no choice but to default on their loans. This would significantly decrease the confidence that we have in government bonds, affecting the way that we interact with them and the way that they interact with each other. Now, let's have a look at the second concept, that everybody is entitled to privacy in their financial transactions. A common complaint with regards to cryptocurrency is that it can be used to enable the sale and purchase of illicit goods. However, a financial system with a complete guarantee of anonymity would have much further implications. My first experience with the stock market was when I was about 10 years old. What had started as an excuse to stay up past my bedtime had quickly snowballed into a fascination with how living, breathing companies could be distilled into a series of numbers, and how that a click of a mouse could then enable their ideas to come to life. A kid with a $20 budget barely stands a chance while surrounded by pump and dump penny stocks, so my dad did the honors of drawing the line between investment and gambling. Every night, weeknights 9 p.m., my dad and I would start plugging funny-looking tickers into Google Finance and watching sporadic red price lines glitch across the screen during the opening minutes of the New York Stock Exchange. And before he let me start throwing my money around, he gave me a golden rule on finding credible companies. Always check the price-to-earnings ratio. In a world where businesses operate using cryptocurrency, that number would mean absolutely nothing. The anonymity provided by cryptocurrency use would enable companies to adjust their revenue statements in order to suit their best interests. So a company that wants to avoid paying tax may report much lower earnings than their actual intake, whereas a company struggling for recognition may post ludicrously high figures that cannot be proved or disproved. This lack of transparency could cause a huge rift between publicly listed companies and their shareholders, affecting the dynamic of the stock exchange as a whole. And that's just scratching the surface. The concept of cryptocurrencies has been floating around in the public eye for roughly a year, and we all know alarmingly little about it. How did something so profoundly disruptive manage to lose its resonance? While this topic is being analyzed in detail by organizations such as the MIT Digital Currency Initiative, our sensationalistic culture often allows productive debate to be trampled in favor of cheap pageantry, leaving ordinary people with the courage to explore this new terrain stranded in a complex web of ulterior motives. The use of cryptocurrency provides a plethora of regulatory challenges on both a domestic and international scale. But whether we want to acknowledge it or not, the way that we choose to handle this technology will have serious implications for the economic growth for generations to come. Change is always scary. There is always an element of crypto, of secrecy, of mystery. And if we want to be able to harness the power of cryptocurrencies for social and economic development, everybody deserves a seat at the table, both the leaders and experts of today and the pioneers of tomorrow. And for that to happen, cryptocurrency needs to be more than just a mystery to those whom it will serve. Thank you.